Afghanistan, where history is carved into the harsh and unforgiving landscape. For centuries, this land has been at the crossroads of empires, drawing conquerors who sought to control it, only to leave battered and defeated. From ancient Persia to the British Empire, and more recently the Soviet Union and the United States, Afghanistan has earned the title of the graveyard of empires. But what makes this country so difficult to conquer? Why do so many great powers fail here? This is the story of Afghanistan, its unique resistance, and the empires that have fallen in its wake. Long before the Cold War and the global war on terror, Afghanistan was already known for its defiance. In 330 BCE, Alexander the Great, one of the most powerful military leaders in history, began his march into Afghanistan as part of his conquest of the Persian Empire. He entered the region through the Khyber Pass, a vital route that connected the Indian subcontinent with Central Asia. But Afghanistan proved to be one of Alexander's toughest challenges. Although Alexander successfully took control of key cities, the Afghan tribes fiercely resisted his attempts at dominance. Alexander's armies were forced to fight not just against hostile forces, but also against the harsh terrain and guerrilla tactics employed by the Afghan warriors. In the end, while he secured passage through the region, Alexander never fully pacified Afghanistan. Even his mighty empire struggled to maintain control over this mountainous land after his death. In the 19th century, the British Empire, at the height of its global power, became the next to learn Afghanistan's painful lesson. The British sought to control Afghanistan as a buffer state between their prized colony of India and the expanding Russian Empire. This led to the First Anglo-Afghan War in 1839. British forces initially captured Kabul and installed a puppet ruler, but the Afghans soon revolted. In 1842, in one of the most humiliating defeats in British military history, a retreating British force of 16,000 soldiers and civilians was massacred by Afghan tribesmen in the mountain passes near Jalalabad. Only one British survivor made it back to safety. Despite this disaster, Britain would invade Afghanistan 2 more times, in 1878 and 1919, but each time the results were the same. The Afghans, using their deep knowledge of the mountainous terrain and guerrilla tactics, drove the British out. The Third Anglo-Afghan War in 1919 ended with Afghanistan regaining full independence, leaving Britain to lick its wounds, never fully able to control the region. By 1979, Afghanistan was once again at the center of global conflict, this time during the Cold War. The Soviet Union, seeking to expand its influence and prop up a communist government in Kabul, invaded Afghanistan. The invasion sparked one of the most intense guerrilla wars in modern history. Afghan resistance fighters, known as the Mujahideen, launched an unrelenting campaign of ambushes, sabotage, and hit-and-run tactics. The mountainous terrain that had defeated previous invaders became the Soviets' greatest obstacle. Soviet tanks and helicopters were ill-suited for Afghanistan's rugged landscape, and the Mujahideen, supplied with advanced weaponry by the United States, including the infamous Stinger missile, turned the war into a quagmire.
Don't send us rice and bandages. Give us weapons so that we can shoot down their guns.
For the Soviet Union, the conflict became increasingly costly in both lives and resources, and after a decade of fighting, they withdrew in defeat in 1989. In the wake of the Soviet withdrawal, Afghanistan descended into civil war as rival factions fought for control. Amid the chaos, the Taliban, a hardline Islamist group, emerged in the mid-1990s, capturing Kabul in 1996. They imposed a brutal interpretation of Islamic law and harbored al-Qaeda, the terrorist group responsible for the attacks on the United States in 2001. The U.S. responded with Operation Enduring Freedom, launching an invasion of Afghanistan in late 2001. The Taliban regime quickly fell, and a new U.S.-backed government was established. However, much like the British and Soviets before them, the U.S. and its allies found that Afghanistan's rugged terrain and decentralized tribal society made long-term control difficult. The Taliban regrouped, often taking refuge in the mountains and along the border with Pakistan, and by the late 2000s, they had reignited their insurgency. Despite vast resources and a global coalition, the U.S. faced the same fate as past empires. After nearly 2 decades of fighting, with over 2,400 American soldiers dead and trillions spent, the war in Afghanistan became America's longest conflict. The Taliban's resilience proved yet again that Afghanistan is a land where foreign powers struggle to maintain control. In August 2021, the world watched in disbelief as the Afghan government collapsed and the Taliban swept back into Kabul without a fight. The U.S. rushed to evacuate its citizens and Afghan allies, leading to chaotic scenes at Kabul's airport. On August 26th, a suicide bombing at Abbey Gate, claimed by ISIS-K, killed 13 U.S. service members and over 170 Afghan civilians, marking a tragic end to the U.S. presence in Afghanistan. The attack underscored the instability that remains in Afghanistan, even as the U.S. military departed. For many, the collapse of the U.S.-backed government and the rapid resurgence of the Taliban symbolized the ultimate failure of America's mission in Afghanistan. Since their return to power in August 2021, the Taliban now rule Afghanistan once again. However, the world remains deeply divided on how to engage with Afghanistan's new government. The Taliban have promised more moderate governance compared to their harsh rule in the 1990s, but concerns over human rights, particularly for women and minorities, dominate international discourse. Many nations, including the United States and European powers, have withheld formal recognition of the Taliban government, calling for guarantees on rights and counter-terrorism commitments. Yet, Afghanistan's strategic location has drawn the attention of major regional powers. Both China and Russia have adopted pragmatic approaches to the Taliban regime. China, with its Belt and Road Initiative, sees Afghanistan as a potential link for trade routes into Central Asia and beyond, and is keen to secure its investments in neighboring Pakistan. Beijing's primary interest is stability and the prevention of any extremist movements that might spill over into China's Xinjiang region. Russia, similarly, has economic and security interests in Afghanistan. Moscow has engaged with the Taliban government, aiming to ensure that extremist groups do not use Afghan territory to destabilize Central Asia, a region Russia considers its sphere of influence. Both China and Russia have taken cautious steps toward cooperation, driven less by ideology and more by strategic interests in regional stability and trade. The international community expects Afghanistan to maintain stability, prevent the spread of terrorism, and respect the rights of its citizens. If the Taliban can manage these expectations, Afghanistan could see an influx of international aid and trade, particularly from neighboring countries. With global powers like China and Russia positioning themselves for long-term cooperation, Afghanistan's future could be shaped by economic partnerships rather than conflict. For Afghanistan, the path forward depends on how it navigates its relationships with the world. The hope remains that through trade, diplomacy, and a commitment to peace, Afghanistan can finally break the cycle of violence and emerge as a vital link in the global economy. In the end, the world's expectations from Afghanistan are clear: stability, cooperation, and a future built on prosperity rather than war.